Studio Rebuild 2021. As you may know, I no longer live in the place where my studio is situated. It's actually at my dad's house, and during lockdown I've not been able to go and do anything there. So it's a little untidy. It needs completely rearranging from the last time I used it. I'm also trying to rearrange it so it's a smaller and more compact setup for me. My wife and I are in the process of moving house, and the new house will have room for the studio, but it's a smaller room than it's currently in. Now, when I built the studio up, it was with the intention of recording bands. For redesign, I want to gear it more towards writing songs myself and making demos to the best of my own ability. I may still record the odd band here and there, but being realistic, I need to split my time between work, my daughter and the studio, as well as other goals such as personal fitness and that kind of thing. So I grabbed a coffee and went to my dad's house to see what kind of state the studio's in and start some work. So this is where we're at so far. Let's take a look. So the desk is pretty intact. I've sold a couple of pieces, but that needs rearranging. All this stuff needs tidying, as does this stuff. Some of the live rigs in here which needs to be sorted out. This IKEA unit's got all the computing things in, like the Thunderbolt hub, the USB hub. I don't really want that anymore. I want to try and get as much of that stuff into the desk as I can. I've just moved the guitars, or the guitar stand, over from here by making some room by moving my old drum kit, kick drum, into the loft. But really it's wall to wall and I don't want it that busy, so we'll do some rearranging there and just some general tidying up. So I think the first thing to do is just to get everything out and start from a blank slate, and then we'll come back and see how we're getting on. Look at all that. Good, we're back to a blank canvas now. Let's start again with some of that cabling. So when you're putting together any kind of layout that uses standard 19-inch rack units, I find it's best to try and plan in advance where you can. A lot of the time the inputs and the outputs and sometimes the power inserts aren't where you'd expect them to be, or they're on opposite sides of the unit, and that can make it a bit more difficult to keep the rear of the units tidy. So I've tried to think about where the power points are, where the audio inputs and outputs are when I put this setup together. But what I will say is there's no substitute for actually getting behind the units and doing the cabling, because sometimes just the way the cables twist or the thickness of different cables makes it more difficult than you'd think it was just by planning it out. So I've planned out 3 variations which effectively just move where the power conditioner is, and hopefully they'll work in real life. So I've decided to start with the version where the power conditioner is at the top of the first rack. I'm trying to think about how all the different power cables are going to cross all the different units and all the other cables come in different directions. And I did toy with the setup where this would be in the middle, because then you'd have power cables going up as well as to the side and down. But it just looked like on the diagrams that I did that this would be the one with the least crossover. So let's see if that translates to real life. Next we have this cobbled together unit. I'm just going to cut to a video I made the other day to explain what I'm doing with this. So what I've done is attached the PSAC, which is the power supply, and then I've got a quarter unit space here. I'll cut down this half rack chassis for some Nutric attachments. One of the not downsides, but just one of the things with this is the inputs are on the back, which means if I want to attach a microphone, etc., I need to mess around at the back of the desk. If I put like a Nutric through unit on here and connect that to the back of this unit, then I can plug in a microphone to the back. I also think I can make it so that I can send another audio source and just patch the 2 things together, kind of like a really primitive kind of patch bay. And the benefit of, I'll turn it around, is the Golden Age doesn't have an IEC input for power, which means you have to use its own 24-volt adapter, which is another thing that you can't plug into the power conditioner. It's not a big deal, but then you've got to use an adapter, then you've got cables all over the place. It doesn't really help with the idea of getting the cables all nice and tidy. But the PSAC does have an IEC input, so I can just connect this to this and connect this to the power conditioner. If I had more of these, it could power up to 4. So it's kind of overkill, but it tidies things up quite nicely. One thing I did notice about this unit is they give you a very long connector cable, or 4 very long connector cables, to go a very, very short distance. So I'm going to use this little void here to manage that. It's an inelegant solution to the problem, but it works fine. So now we're starting to think about the audio path, and the first thing in the chain is the preamp. This is a Golden Age Pre-73 Mark III, which is like a clone of a Neve 1073. It's in a half rack, and up till now I've had that kind of blank area here, so I've filled that with the PSAC, which is basically going to stop this from having its own clunky 24 volt power supply. Obviously when you've got limited wall sockets, and also you want to run things off a power conditioner to keep your stuff safe, having the odd unit that's just got these big huge transformers is no good. That left me with a 1/4 unit spare, so I've cobbled together this piece here. When I was hacking it to pieces, it got all scratched and scuffed, so I spray painted it with the only can of spray paint I had lying around, but I quite like that colour contrast. I'll explain a bit more about how these work when I hook up the other units, but essentially it's like a small patch plate. There's an in and an out. The input is going to be connected directly to the preamp, which is going to remove the problem of having the input for this on the rear, which I suppose is useful in some situations, but in this small home studio it means if I want to connect a microphone I either have to have a piece of cable just lying around, or have to crawl behind the desk and connect it to the rear of this each time I want to record vocals, whereas with this I can have it front mounted and connect it whenever I like. The output's going to be connected to one of the outs of the audio interface, almost like a built-in reamp for the Golden Age, and then the compressor. So as well as going from a microphone into the preamp and next into the compressor, I can also send audio, like pre-recorded audio, out of here. I'll patch it into here, back into the preamp, then into the compressor, and back into the audio unit. So that means I can use my preamp and compressor chain live as well as with pre-recorded stuff. Next is something I'm quite excited about. This is brand new out of the box. It's the Stam Audio SA76 ADG limiting amplifier. I haven't even been able to use this yet. I'm going to do a thorough review of it at some point. But as a slight disclaimer, I don't work for Stam Audio. Basically I did some work for them by refining the English language version of their website. So my GCSE in English language has finally borne some fruit. And this unit was a gift from Josh Stam for doing that for him. So I'm keen to try it. I hope it works, having come all the way from Chile, but we'll see. Thinking about the audio path, the microphone will be connected here, which is connected to the rear of the preamp. The preamp then goes into the compressor, and that'll go into the audio interface. Next we have the audio interface, which is the Focusrite Claret 8 Pre Thunderbolt. Obviously Thunderbolt's faster than USB. There's Thunderbolt 3 now. This has served me well for some years now, and I've currently got no intention to replace it. And last but by no means least is the Stam Audio SA4000 stereo bus compressor. So I tend to do top-down mixing, which means that I have my master bus set up before I even start mixing. So I don't need to do a mix and then do the master channel afterwards and find out the whole thing's screwed up. This basically gets a stereo feed from the audio interface, compresses it, and then 2 channels back to the interface, and I have that on all the time when I'm mixing. It's a great unit. Again, it's a clone of the SSL compressor, so for people that like to see all the dials going, this is going to be quite a fun side of the desk. Moving over to the right hand side, start with the Amphion Amp 100, which is the amplifier for my passive speakers. Basically, if you don't know the difference, active speakers don't need power in, they have their own power supply, whereas these Amphions, which are very, very nice speakers, need a separate amplifier, which is this thing here. Next we have my Axe FX2. Now up until recently I had a Kemper, an Axe FX and a Pod XT, plus a load of pedals. The idea being that I'd have as many options as possible. The reality is that I find this thing subjectively better sounding, and although you might in theory dial in a great tone and then switch the delays and reverbs to analog pedals, in practice I never did that. So they've all been sold, and this is going to be my main guitar modeler from now on. Quite sad to see the Kemper go because I've had it for years, but if you're not using something, there's no point in holding on to it. Let somebody else enjoy it. Again, I found this sounded subjectively better to my ears. My guitar teacher, Des Sherwood, whose channel you should definitely check out, has me saved in his phone as Johnny Kemper, on the basis that I owned a Kemper. So I'm not sure what the future is for Johnny Kemper, but for now, the Axe FX is providing all my guitar sounds. I have kept hold of my Pod XT Pro because I still think that the Line 6 Big Bottom is the greatest guitar tone of all time, so I'm keeping that. Now what I don't have for the Axe FX, which I did for the Kemper, is a way of powering a cab. My Kemper was powered, whereas the Axe-Fx requires a separate power amp. Now I don't have a power amp, however what I did pick up recently was this used Laney IRT Studio, which is a tube head in a rack format. Fortunately Laney's headquarters are in the same town as I live, so I emailed them and they were kind enough to send me out a set of rack ears, which the used version didn't come with, for the princely sum of £6, so that's going to be the slave power amp for the Axe-Fx for now. I know people swear by the Matrix power amps, but looking online I'm not sure whether they've gone out of business or they're not available anymore, but you can't seem to get them from anywhere. So if anyone either knows what happened to the Matrix power amps or can offer a good alternative, let me know. I know people don't have many kind things to say about the power tubes in here, but for just the purposes of powering a cab in this room to play along to without having to turn the whole setup on, hopefully it'll do the trick. The Laney's in place. The wings don't really match up very well with the rack. You know, don't rule out user error, but it's not particularly impressive. But now it's at the bottom of the rack, so just let gravity do its work. Got all the power cabling done now. Doesn't look it, but it's way neater than anything I've had before, and nothing hangs down to the floor, which is great. Everything's wired in nicely, so the next job is to replace this old flat pack. I've been looking for all sorts of solutions to this, but hopefully a simple solution is to raise the monitor up on a little shelf that I found online for not too much money, to be honest. It's a little flat pack that's come, so fortunately I enjoyed making flat packs, so the idea is this will be raised up and all the computing things, the hubs etc. will be in there, but this won't be too much taller. I kind of hope this would be good quality, but you know, for what I paid for it, it should be at least fair quality. But look at the state of this. And that's the side that you see. Covered in scratches. Not cool. But whatever D and E are on the instructions, they're not even included. I mean, I don't know how this could have happened. Oh. In the end it doesn't look too bad, but IKEA this is not. We're at the stage now where all the main stuff is now cabled in. It's going to give everything a little test to make sure everything works before I start tidying up and making everything else a little bit nicer, because if this doesn't work the whole thing has been pointless. Okay, so we have power everywhere, that's a good start. Next we need to check for audio. Okay, so I've got a microphone connected into the patch I made, into the preamp, into the SA76 compressor. Everything appears to be working how it's supposed to. That's really good. The only thing for now, I think I'm going to call it a night and then come back another day and do all the tidying up and make everything look nice, but all the main stuff's working, that's great. So coming back the next day turned out to be coming back a week later. I guess that's just how life is now. Okay, not too bad. Got a bit of stuff to sort out. This thing is a bit annoying because I've run out of screws for the rack case and they don't use standard screw sizes. That's a Thomann 12U rack and that should be living with the live rig in another room, but can't currently turn it on its side. This is how I spend my free time now, detangling hundreds of cables. Look at this guy. Done. I've given myself loads of extra space by decluttering. You might not be able to tell so much because where the camera is now is where most of the clutter was, but the space in here has been opened up quite nicely. It no longer feels overly cluttered in here. All the stuff I need is now in the desk or nearby, and it gives me confidence that when I do move house and have to downsize to a smaller room, all this stuff will fit in there quite easily. So I've got all my production tools in the desk, so a preamp, a compressor, my audio interface and a stereo compressor for the mix bus. I have my amplification on this side, so the power amp for the speakers, the Axe-Fx for my guitar sounds and the Laney to power my cab. Just over here I have my cab and on top of that is my Behringer DeepMind 6, which is my main and now only synth. And to save both physical space and space on the interface, I've copied somebody else's idea and and put the outputs of the synth into the effects loop of the Axe effects. Quite an effective technique because I don't need the effects loop most of the time, but what that does allow me to do is put the synth straight in via the same inputs as the Axe effects and apply some of the Axe effects' the Axe effects' effects, the Axe effects' effects, the effects in the Axe, the effects in the Axe effects, delay and reverb in the Axe effects. Basically means I can put some delay and reverb onto the synth. All the stuff that makes the hybrid setup work, i.e. the Thunderbolt dock and the drives, the USB hub, etc., are all now as part of the desk, so they're not taking any extra space. And I can simply dock my MacBook and the whole thing works perfectly. Another new bonus of this setup is using the Laney as a power amp for the Axe effects means that I can power the cab and play some guitar without having to turn the whole setup on like I normally would if I wanted to use the Kemper or the Axe effects into Ableton and then through the speakers, for instance. So hopefully having a quicker setup time to just play guitar means I might end up writing some more stuff. I think in the next 12 months as well, there's talk of a new 27-inch iMac coming out this year. The MacBook currently works great, but if I want to update the setup, then that should integrate perfectly with this because it's almost already a desktop setup. So if you've got any questions about the setup, please let me know in the comments. I do my best to always answer questions in my YouTube comments. But this for me is a great setup for clawing back from the misguided idea of turning this into a recording studio and bringing it back more towards the home studio that was my original intention. And hopefully that translates to just making more music. So that's my home studio in 2021. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.